ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa says the unity of the tripartite alliance is key to addressing the country's challenges. He made the comments while addressing Cosatu's main May Day rally in Bethlehem in the Free State earlier today. Ramaphosa reiterated his party's commitment to renewing and reconfiguring the alliance to address high unemployment and a weak economy.
Much as Workers' Day is taking place today, during a very difficult time for our country, we want to say that, yes, issues such as poverty, unemployment, inequality are challenges that can only be effectively addressed if we, as the Alliance, continue working together.
With that, let's get reaction on this story from Cosatu founding secretary Jay Naidoo, who joins us on the line. Mr. Naidoo, thank you so much and to join us here. And I guess happy May Day to you.
Well, thank you very much, Vienna. It's it brings back a number of both joyful and painful memories, because I remember 37 years ago being in a May Day rally in Durban and at Curry's Fountain, the home in Durban of many a rally in our freedom struggle. And not far from Curry's Fountain was another rally held by the Inkatha Freedom Party, at which they had 60,000 people, all dressed for war, and they were launching UWUSA, the alternative to Cosatu, because they believed that Cosatu was politically inspired by the African National Congress. We were a front. And so, yes, it brings back the memory of a time and tragic loss of many lives in the journey of fighting for our freedom, and the primary role played by workers, mainly migrant workers, who actually freed our country. As leaders, we were just megaphones of what was happening on the ground. But if it wasn't for the workers' struggle, I shudder to believe what we would be living under today. But we certainly, the struggle would have been a lot longer and a lot bloodier if it hadn't been for the remarkable role, not that leaders play, but ordinary workers and their families and their communities played in freeing our country, which today doesn't still belong to the people that freed this country.
If you may, just take me back to that time in 1985. Right in the heart of apartheid, a movement is formed in Cosatu. What was the key mandate of Cosatu when it was formed in 1985?
The idea of Cosatu came as the apartheid repression intensified its noose around us as black people, and were prepared to kill a number of people. There were tens of thousands of people in detention, tens of thousands of people who had to leave into exile, many hundreds of activists that either were tortured or disappeared, and we're still looking for bodies of some of these activists. So the time was, rapidly escalating into a civil war. We were in the first stage of a civil war in this country. And so it also was a time which, in 1987, they bombed Cosatu headquarters, hoping to disrupt our lines of communication. And then they bombed the headquarters, Kotso House of the South African Council of Churches. So this was a terrible time, a time of boycotting, a time of massacres, a time of terror that was unleashed on us from within the apartheid state itself. We later found out that the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Police orchestrated the bombing of Cosatu House in 1987. So it was a time also that led to the great mine workers' strike that shook the very citadel of white power in this country, economic power and political power. So I think emerging out of that time, it was the union movement that was the backbone, because much of the political movements had been smashed. And so, yes, I think today is a memory of that time and the sacrifice that has been made by particularly migrant workers, who today suffer the same conditions that we suffered in that time. And I think that's what's tragic, that 37 years later, millions of workers have lost their jobs. Empowerment still remains a great challenge, where wealth is still primarily held in the hands of a white minority, with a little bit of pepper of what they call black diamonds. I don't understand this concept. And this process of transformation never came from the movement, never came from the ANC or the SACP or from Cosatu. Our idea of transformation is that there would be negotiations on the farms, in the shops, in the mines, between workers and unions and the employers about how we would transform this economy. And sad to say, 29 years later, we still are facing that challenge.
I want us to go to that point, but before we get to that point, you say that credit must be given to the migrant workers, the people who were actually on the ground. But from your perspective, what was it like being a leader in those times and forming a movement like this and not knowing if, this will succeed and how far it will go in playing a role in freeing South Africa, lack of a better phrasing?
Well, let me say, on that day, in May 1st, 1986, 60,000 people in the Inkatha Freedom Party were walking around with coffins on which my name and President Elijah Bahai's name was. So we were a number of death lists at that point. But I think the issue is, and this is my message to young people today, a revolution doesn't start with many people. It starts with an individual taking a decision that I've had enough. My having had enough happened at 15 years old when I went to listen to Steve Biko. And his message resonates within me even today. And this was in 1968 when I heard him say that we have nothing to lose but our chains, because the mind of the oppressed is the main weapon in the hands of the oppressor. So that was his message to us. And what it meant is that I had to go out and see what I could do as an individual. And thank God that Steve Biko never gave us a business plan. Thank God he didn't have money to give out free T-shirts or handout. And thank God we didn't have a PowerPoint presentation in those days. So we went out individually, and along the way, we found others that had the same ideas or different ideas, but we were like water that collected down a mountain in little rivulets and then comes to tributaries and finally reaches a river, a mighty river. And this is what Cosatu became. It was a giant that would, this is what our current president said at the first inaugural conference of Cosatu, that it is a giant that will stand in the path of anyone who continues to oppress us, to stand on our heads. And this was the context within which Cosatu was launched. And and that's what connected us to a movement for political freedom, because we recognized that it was impossible to have rights on a factory floor and then leave that factory gate and then face someone asking you for a dompas, or face being abused by white society, particularly the white security forces. So yes, we were fighting a struggle for life. And if I remember that 1986 rally, that was what it was, repression. It meant that we were prepared to die for our freedom. That's the commitment we made. And today I'm asking young people, what are you prepared to do to change your situation? Because today the struggle should be about what are you prepared to live for? Because we've won democracy. But this democracy is not working for the majority of black people in this country. And particularly for black youth in this country.
Let's touch on that then. Then you move from Cosatu, the movement, 1985, with all the issues that come with it. And then 1994, we attained freedom. And then we are now 29 years later into democracy. Have the issues changed? Are we still stuck in the same place?
I think we're still stuck in the same place, except, and we must never underestimate this, that the repression and the racism that was institutionalized. You know, when I was growing up, as a teenager, I thought I was inferior to white people because of the color of my skin. Everything was blocked. And so we will never go back there, because that, even though it's intangible, people that are born today or born after 1994, like my children, could never understand what apartheid did to us psychologically or emotionally, besides the physical beating that it gave us. And so we carry a wound in us. And the wound of South Africa still stands. Because whether it's the wound of superiority or inferiority, it's the same wound. And we have not healed from this wound. And our attempts to try and rectify that situation, because a wound can only be corrected or healed if we make a collective decision that apartheid was wrong, which if we're now convinced, and I think everyone should be convinced, that democracy was very important, that the role of the Mandela generation was to create a constitutional democracy within which we have our hands on the levers of power, and that we have a commitment going forward to transform. And the reality is that was the mission statement of the Mandela generation. They delivered what they promised: one person, one vote in a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist South Africa. Now, if we have failed to take those levers of power and improve the quality of life of our people as we promised in 1994, a better life, if we have failed to do that, we cannot point a finger at the Mandela generation. We point it at ourselves and those that are still in power today.
But Mr. Naidoo, how then did we get it wrong? Or where did we get it wrong? If we are saying we are still back where we are, if the issues are still the same that you were facing in 1986, 1987, with a black government in charge, how did we get it wrong, and where did we get it wrong?
Well, I think one of the leading lights of the ANC once said that, you know. He said, we do not struggle to be poor. What does that mean? It means an organization lost its purpose, lost its moral cause, its conscience. It no longer is the lodestar of those that are committed to serving our population, the servant leadership that we had in this country. Look at how embittered, how aggrieved, how broken leaders that have been and given their life to us, how they left their lives. You know, whether it's a Mandela or Ahmed Kathrada or Andrew Mlangeni, you look at all of them. All of us as elders are standing here and looking at the cesspool of corruption that exists, of arrogance of power, that a state that is supposed to be serving its society, its citizens, has been sold to the highest bidders. So whether it's in this pandemic response where millions of workers have lost their jobs, did any politician lose their salary in this? Were the CEOs of major companies losing benefits or losing their jobs? In fact, in this pandemic, $5 trillion was made by the 1%. And if I was looking at statistics in this pandemic, we have seen 40 billionaires created through the suffering that they imposed on us through the way they enforced this pandemic. So when I look at it, I feel that this country is ripe for another revolution. The only thing is young people need to find their voice, to find their agency, to find their struggles, and they find their destiny. So I think, you know, I'm amongst the people that are fed up now. We're fed up with corruption. We're fed up with the people not doing their job. If you're a teacher, you should be teaching. If you're a member of parliament, do your job. Otherwise, get out of the way. That's the message of this May Day, that the people are fed up. In our last elections was evidence of that. 18 million people, more half of the population of this country, didn't even bother to to vote. While we are still alive, there are people that I know that died for the right to this vote. What they have done is defile the democracy that generations have fought for. And I think I cannot understand why there are not more people marching on the streets, banging on the doors of those in power and saying, we've had enough of you.
So Mr. Naidoo, just in the interest of time, allow me just to cut in there. Listening to the leaders speaking today at the May Day rally, and the focus again on the tripartite alliance, is this a situation that can be salvaged from a political perspective? Or, as you say, it's in the hands of the public, it's in the hands of the youth to decide where we take this country?
I think we're in the same situation that we were when we were young. We have a government that is not serving us anymore. We have an economic model in the country that is not serving the majority. It's continuing to enrich and to privilege a small minority, which is still largely a white minority control of our economy with a few black diamonds in it. We have a model of transformation that does not work and does not serve the black youth of this country, where 60% of youth coming out of 12 years of education have very few skills, no job, unlikely to have a job in our lifetime. I think we need to change the emphasis from saying we're going to create jobs, because the technological and digital revolution has changed the very nature of production. And so now we should be talking about livelihoods. How do we create entrepreneurs? How do we understand who we are as Africans, and rather than being a poor photocopy of the West or the East or the North? I think we need a whole new narrative, because nothing is working today. The old is dying. We know that. And we have to look for what is the new ways in which we can create a decent life, a better quality of life where people's basic needs are met. Because if you look at it today, we were the pariah of racism in the past. Today we are pariah of inequality. In democracy, we have become the most unequal country. And unfortunately, that inequality is still racial. It's still black and white.
So Mr. Naidoo,
I think we have much work to do. And we need a new organization, a new movement. We need young people to rethink politics in this country, because I don't see any hope in any of the political parties that today exist.
Well, you partly answered my last question, which was going to be looking forward from what you have seen and from your experience, having experienced the Biko years when you were 15 years old. Do you believe that we have the right leadership across all board that can take us over the threshold and I guess take us to the promised land?
Well, we do have leadership, but we look in the wrong place. We're looking up for leadership. Nowhere in the world is there one leader that I can say can inspire us like a Steve Biko inspired me and millions of the 1976 generation. Not one leader I can name in any sector: business, politics, health, United Nations, any organization. They are a complete disappointment, captured by a 1% and led by the nose by those that have vested interest in maintaining a system of control through fear, shame, and guilt, and controlling us as humanity. If I look down, I see thousands of examples. And that's why you will never see me in some big banquet sitting there and drinking champagne with people. I prefer to be in the townships and the villages. I've just come from Nairobi, where I've been sitting with activists in Kenya and Pan-African activists as well. Those are the people that inspire me. Nothing from the top inspires me today.
Do you think, Mr. Naidoo, that the South African labor law, just to squeeze one more in there, is too rigid? Because it has been criticized, and that's why we're finding ourselves maybe in some confusing places.
Well, it's absolute nonsense, that. Too rigid for who? What does that rigidity mean? Are they still wanting to maintain the exploitative system where people are paid starvation wages? Look at the billions that these companies are earning, these mining companies, taking our raw materials. What do they fight for as workers? What do we fight for? I mean, what was Marikana about? 70 15,500 rand as a wage for a rock drill miner that slaves at the coal face, at the platinum face, at the gold face? And how many billions goes out of this country feeding that predatory elites that exist internationally and in our country? It is the most ridiculous notion to say that it's labor laws that are stopping the growth of our economy. Corruption is. The political elites, the economic elites, the trade union elites, all of them are complicit in why our economy is not growing, because they're all feeding out of that trough of the exploitation of black workers today, as it was in the 80s.
Mr. Naidoo, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for taking time to speak to us and taking us back down memory lane.